Oh, that's great. So, what was the other book you said? I want to subtitle these for people.
Violence by James Gilligan. James Gilligan, Dr. James Gilligan. He's a 25-year prison psychiatrist. He dealt with the most violent human beings you could ever come up with, serial killers, and every single one of them, he found the exact same patterns. He debunks the idea of genes and biological elements. Well, biology does have a relevance, but it's biology that's influenced by environment. But genes, no relationship to violent behavior in the grand scheme of things. Propensities can be pushed forward, as Jacques talks about. He did one of the most thorough jobs I've seen of analyzing what creates really offensive, aberrant human behavior, usually in the form of a retribution mentality, of vindictiveness, of this hatred that materializes in people, and the reasons why. And it really goes back to the fact that it's pretty much all environmental. It's almost explicitly, and it has to be, obviously, but I want to reiterate that for those who think it isn't. All the analysis I've seen about evolution of violence, it's completely thrown out the door. You can't... The violent behavior... Actually, I'm going to stop there, because as you can tell, Joel, I can ramble on these subjects. But I recommend that book, because he does a tremendously good analysis of the patterns of historical violence, and there's no continuity. It's in and out. He also goes into other cultures, discuss how violent relationships happen there, and the moral and value elements in these cultures, and how they have no violence, how they haven't had a murder in the existence of the entire culture. These are small subcultures that exist around the planet, not necessarily hunter-gatherers, but other cultures like the Amish and other cultures similar to that. They don't have any violence at all. And I just thought that was incredible. Not to mention, many of them don't have any crime on any level. So there's a reason why these things persist, and I'm going to have a very big section on that in the new film.
That's excellent. You know, a lot of people in the movement seem to be into this guy, Robert Sapolsky. Is it Robert Sapolsky?
Oh, I like Sapolsky's work a lot. I couldn't say anything bad about Sapolsky's work. The only thing I would say is that if you read his works, he doesn't really hone in on the social ramifications in a really direct way. That's about it. But I do recommend all of his books. He has 4 of them last I checked. And he does some really great essays on environment, relationships to human behavior, the relationship of hormonal attributes and how they really don't. High testosterone, for example, does not just trigger aggressive behavior as the mythology has put forward for many, many decades now. Ultimately, he does a very good job of explaining how environment shapes biological function and creates many disorders that we see today. Not to mention, he was just a brilliant anthropologist who lived with baboons, and he has some wonderful stories he describes in his experience for 20 years living with these analyzing the behavior of the baboon group.
Right.
His kind of little claim to fame, as far as his analysis, of his experience, was his baboon troop, which had existed he had monitored for 20 years, if I remember correctly. They suffered a big problem where the alpha males were killed off, unfortunately, by eating polluted garbage. And basically what happened is the alpha males were gone. The aggressive chain reaction from the top down, the tit-for-tat that tends to exist in the class structure of the baboons, suddenly dissipated dramatically. And for up until this day, as far as I understand, the level of violence and aggression and tit-for-tat that used to exist in this baboon troop is now utterly negligible in more or less his language, which goes to show again that even what appears to be natural, phenomena, what appears to be some nature of, say, mammalian organisms or primates, isn't necessarily. It just appears that way because that's all we see, because all the environments have been consistent, and that's a very important point. So I recommend his work tremendously, and his analysis of that particular instance is very, very important to the nature-nurture debate, if you want to call it that, even though I can't stand that term anymore. But no, I like Sapolsky a lot. This is the fabric of the social change. As far as I'm concerned, and some might disagree, I have no faith in the political system to make the relevant changes that are required. And I don't feel we can wait for the political structure, which is owned by the corporate structure, as we all know, to wise up and realize that their survival is also dependent on a larger order social change. both in values and in the entire architecture of the global system. The city systems have to be altered. We have to move to renewables and everything that Jacques talks about, obviously where the Venus Project comes into play. So to go out and start a chapter is actually a very courageous thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not easy for someone to initiate that themselves and to bring in people, find a meeting spot, and to begin to let it grow. So I don't want people to belittle those concepts. Those that come at me and say, oh, well, we should start building, and it's all very sexy and tangible to think about, well, let's raise $1 billion and build a new city. But as Jacques has explicitly pointed out, the values have to undergo a process of change before we can think about a society that is actually operating on a sustainable level, meaning there isn't this utterly excessive need of want, which is completely contrived. It's not based on any human attribute that we want more and more and more. This is a value imposed by the corporate system because that is exactly what fuels everything. If people didn't have the value of greed and have the value of jealousy, the entire global economy would collapse. Those are the values that are those are the values that are pushed forward by everyone, and it's that it's required. So until those values are overcome, until people see the destructive nature of this zealous acquisition of materialism, then that's just one little level. Then I don't see how this change can really manifest, even if we had a full city. Mm-hmm. So the communicative cultural influence project, if you will, the social therapy, as Jacques called it, and I use that to this day, that's such a great term, is the most important issue by all means. This is why I will continue to make films. This is why I encourage people to do anything they can to post media. Again, we can debate technicals all day. I have very little concern about what Jacques speaks of. In fact, he's stated to me, he's like, the easiest thing is to build these things. The easiest thing is to do the resource management. The easiest thing is to get this system set up. It's the perception of the public that's the problem, because of all of the old values and all of the indoctrination and all the division that has been instilled in people to think that they're better than someone else universally. This is the social Darwinistic aspect that is continually reinforced in the free market, global free market system. And that's how they justify. That's how they justify the millions and millions of homeless people in New York City. It's just so horrifying to see these families outside of my front door where I put my garbage. Every single day there's these families that come, and I mean families, and they go through everyone's garbage to pull out all the bottles for recycling. And it's horrifying. And we just look the other way, and that's just the way it is. It's not the way it is. And it's time people begin to feel that, to really feel the humanity in that. And then I think hopefully they'd be motivated to jump on board and push forward to this, what is very difficult but very, very necessary social revolution, if you will. So.
Well, what else do you think people ought to know?
That's a big question. I could talk for like 20 hours.
That's all right.
On what I think people ought to know. I guess it just depends on where your priorities are.
Yeah.
So I would like to go back to the point regarding frustration about what to do and how to think about how to function and operate. You have to kind of make, how do I describe this? You have to think of your life in kind of two different ways now if you're a part of the movement. You have to realize you still have to survive. You can't just assume this is going to happen next year and stop paying your credit card bills or anything like that. I don't advocate anything that would disturb the integrity of the general personal survival of people. I believe there's going to be a heavy compromised move of collapse within the next few years. It's going to go unabated. There isn't going to be an economic recovery. It's only just going to be more and more conditioning to get used to the state of affairs as the standards of living drop for virtually everyone except the upper 1%. And as you all know from the statistics, the stratification is getting nothing but stronger. The global stratification is its highest level probably ever. I'd say it's probably worse than the peasants and the dynasties if you really put it into perspective, but I can't say that definitively. But the illusion is so powerful that people not only accept the system and accept the stratification, accept the idea of their self-worth being less, therefore they they can't get a job. Well, I can't get a job because I must not be very good. I mean, there was a poor girl who killed herself last year, which I think you might have read about, because she couldn't find a job. She submitted 200 applications, wrote a suicide note, said, I'm not worth anything.